They told us the Middle Ages were an age of knights and castles, of glittering tournaments and courtly love. But behind the walls of monasteries, in the chambers of noble lords, and even on the muddy floors of peasant huts, another story unfolded. A story rarely told in textbooks because it reeks of shame, of lust, of desperation. Imagine a world without privacy, where marriage beds were sometimes blessed by an audience, where fertility was not just a personal matter, but the survival of entire lineages. Imagine doctors prescribing the most outlandish remedies to inflame passion, from powdered beetles to mixtures of wine and animal parts. Imagine church courts demanding proof that a marriage was consummated, and sometimes watching it happen. Sex in the Middle Ages was not hidden. It was regulated, controlled, and often twisted into rituals that would shock us today. To the medieval mind, every act of the body was bound up with sin, with superstition, with the eternal battle between God and the devil. And yet, those same bodies betrayed secret hungers. Kings took mistresses and called them companions of the bed. Priests broke vows of celibacy with women and sometimes with boys. Farmers whispered of charms that could make a lover burn with desire or curse a rival into impotence. It was an age of contradictions. Manuals written by priests described in detail what could and could not be done in bed. But the same manuals reveal more than prohibition. They reveal curiosity, obsession, and fear. They show us that medieval people thought about sex constantly, not just as pleasure, but as danger, as disease, as witchcraft. This is not the Middle Ages you were taught in school. This is the hidden Middle Ages, raw, grotesque, sometimes darkly comical. A world where chastity belts may not have been myth, where aphrodisiacs promised miracles, where public bedding ceremonies turned intimacy into spectacle. So tonight, we enter that hidden world. We walk through the shadows of history, guided not by polished chronicles of kings and saints, but by the whispers that survived in court records, in forbidden texts, and in the scandalous confessions of ordinary men and women. But be warned, once you glimpse how strange, how bizarre, how unsettling these practices were, you may never look at the Middle Ages the same way again, because what we are about to uncover is not just history. It is the secret life of an entire civilization, written on the body, silenced by shame, but never truly forgotten. And it all begins with a single question: what did it really mean to make love in the Middle Ages? To understand the strange sexual practices of the Middle Ages, we must first step into their world. Imagine the streets of a medieval town. They reeked of smoke, dung, and sweat. Carts creaked across cobblestones, pigs rooted in the mud, and beggars cried out for alms. The air itself carried the smell of humanity close, unwashed, and ever-present. In such a world, bodies could never truly be hidden. Most people lived in cramped wooden houses, often just 1 or 2 rooms. Entire families slept together, sometimes even with their animals for warmth. Privacy was a luxury almost no one could afford. A marital bed might be nothing more than a straw mattress on the floor, and children would be curled up only a few feet away. Sex was not a private act. It was something that happened within earshot, often within sight of others. And yet, in this same world, ideals of chastity and purity were preached relentlessly. The church taught that sex was dangerous, that desire was sinful, and that even within marriage, it was to be done sparingly, only for procreation and never for pleasure. Priests railed from pulpits about the dangers of lust, warning that carnal indulgence led to damnation. Manuals of confession listed, in obsessive detail, every forbidden act, and priests were trained to interrogate the faithful about what they had done in their beds. But ideals clashed constantly with reality. Medieval rulers needed heirs, and peasants needed children to work the fields. Sex was unavoidable, and so it became one of the most heavily regulated parts of life. The calendar itself was filled with restrictions. No sex during Lent, no sex on feast days, No sex on Sundays, no sex while pregnant, no sex after childbirth until a priest gave permission. By some calculations, nearly half the year was officially off limits. Yet humans, then as now, found ways to bend the rules. Clothing, too, reflected the contradictions. Noble women wore elaborate gowns with tight bodices and trailing skirts, yet stories abound of secret liaisons in castle halls. Men flaunted codpieces, padded and exaggerated to display their virility. In the countryside, peasants wore rough wool and linen, often infested with lice and fleas. Desire did not wait for silken sheets. It flared wherever it could. And then there was medicine. Medieval physicians, drawing on ancient texts from Galen and Hippocrates, believed that the body was ruled by the balance of four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Sexual desire, they argued, was tied to heat and moisture. Women were thought to be naturally colder than men, and thus more lustful, needing the warmth of men's seed to balance them. Doctors prescribed bizarre treatments to stoke or to quell desire: powders made of animal parts, baths in strange concoctions, even bleeding as a cure for lust. Superstition, too, played its part. Charms were whispered over herbs, amulets were worn to ward off impotence, and witches were accused of stealing men's virility by collecting their seed. In some court records, men swore they had been rendered powerless by spells, their manhood literally shriveled away by sorcery. This was the world of the Middle Ages, crowded, smelly, superstitious, obsessed with sin and salvation, yet incapable of escaping the pull of the flesh. It was a society that punished lust with shame, yet could not survive without it. And within this world, practices developed that seem almost unbelievable to us now. Some were public, some were private, and some were so strange they read more like myth than reality. But they were real enough to leave traces in church records, medical treatises, and whispered folklore. The question is, what exactly did medieval people do when the doors were closed, when the candles were blown out, and when no priest could see? If history books give us the rules, then legends give us the exceptions. For every stern decree of the church, whispers told a different story of secret rituals, forbidden pleasures, and punishments so bizarre they sound like nightmares. Take the infamous chastity belt. Popular imagination paints it as a cruel iron device locked around a woman's waist to guarantee her fidelity. Some say crusading knights strapped them on their wives before riding to war. But the truth is tangled. No medieval document confirms widespread use. Many of the belts displayed in museums were made centuries later, likely as curiosities. Still, the rumor alone reveals the fears of the age, that desire, left unchecked, would unravel families and kingdoms alike. Other tales focused on fertility. In a time when children meant survival, couples turned to extraordinary measures. Legends describe women drinking potions made of wolf liver, men eating roasted testicles of animals, and couples bathing in warm wine spiced with exotic herbs. Some whispered that witches could craft love potions so strong they bordered on curses, binding two people in eternal, maddening desire. In rural villages, charms were said to be hidden under bedsheets or buried at doorways, to either bless a union or doom it. Then there were the public rituals. In parts of France and Germany, it was said that noble weddings were not truly valid until the union was witnessed, sometimes literally. Chroniclers record cases where newlyweds were escorted to their chamber while guests waited outside, listening for the sounds of consummation. In extreme stories, attendants even lifted sheets afterward to prove that the act had taken place. Whether exaggerated or not, the legends reflect how deeply sex was tied to law, inheritance, and public honor. Sin, too, carried its own folklore. Priests preached of hellfire reserved for those who strayed into unnatural acts. Yet the very sermons that condemned sodomy, adultery, or bestiality described them in such detail that listeners could not help but imagine them. Rumors spread of abbots keeping mistresses within monastery walls, of nuns giving birth in silence, of traveling clerics who offered absolution in exchange for secret pleasures. These were the scandals people whispered about by firelight, half believing, half afraid. Not all tales were salacious, some were cautionary. In England, there was a belief that if a couple lay together on certain forbidden holy days, their children would be cursed, born sickly, deformed, or doomed to die young. In Italy, stories told of demons called incubi and succubi, who slipped into bedrooms at night, seducing sleepers and leaving them drained, marked, even pregnant. Such legends blurred the line between superstition and lived experience. Even kings and queens were not spared. Court rumors accused monarchs of grotesque appetites of bedding, scores of mistresses, of experimenting with strange acts, of siring illegitimate heirs by the dozen. Chroniclers, eager to slander rivals, wrote tales that blurred truth and invention. One queen was accused of keeping lovers disguised as monks. A prince was said to have died of a disease contracted through excessive indulgence. These stories were rarely proven, but they clung to reputations like stains that never faded. All of these legends, whether born of fact, fear, or fantasy, paint a picture of a society both fascinated and horrified by sex. People whispered what they dared not speak aloud. They embroidered truths with myth, turning private acts into public gossip, and gossip into timeless rumor. But how much of this can we believe? Were chastity belts ever real, or just a later invention to mock the Middle Ages? Did villagers truly wait outside bridal chambers, or did scandal-loving writers exaggerate the tale? Did witches and demons stalk medieval beds, or were they shadows cast by guilt and imagination? The line between rumor and record is thin, and it leads us to the next question. What evidence survives, and what do the documents of the time really say? If legends reveal what people whispered, then records reveal what they could not hide. And in the Middle Ages, the records are astonishing: court transcripts, church decrees, even medical manuals that preserved, sometimes unwillingly, the strange realities of medieval sex. Let us begin with the Church. The Fourth Lateran Council of the 13th century did not simply regulate faith and doctrine. It also obsessed over marriage and the body. Priests were ordered to ensure marriages were valid, which meant verifying that couples were capable of consummation. If a husband could not perform, his marriage could be annulled. And so courts sometimes demanded proof, sworn testimony, about a man's virility, or even humiliating physical inspections. In one notorious case, an entire jury of matrons was summoned to examine a nobleman and report whether he could perform the marital duty. Records of annulments read like confessions. Wives testified that their husbands were unable to know them. Husbands argued their wives were too cold or too tight. Physicians were called to give expert opinions, diagnosing impotence, sterility, or what they delicately called defects of the member. These were not rumors, they were legal matters, written in ink, sealed with authority. Medical texts add another layer. In the 12th century, a popular handbook called the Trotula circulated across Europe, filled with advice for women. It included recipes for perfumes, ointments, and cosmetics, but also detailed instructions for increasing sexual pleasure. One remedy suggested rubbing the body with certain herbs to make intercourse more agreeable. Another prescribed concoctions to inflame lust in women who seemed cold. Though written by men, these texts betray an awareness that women not only felt desire, but sought ways to enhance it. Doctors also wrote about the dangers of excessive desire. They believed men could literally waste away if they spilled too much seed. Some warned that young men who overindulged would grow pale, weak, even mad. For women, the danger was different. Physicians claimed that if women did not have regular sexual release, their wombs could become wandering, roaming inside the body and causing suffocation, madness, or even death. This condition, they said, explained why widows or virgins might suddenly collapse to cure it, marriage, or at least intercourse. Such beliefs made female sexuality both feared and pathologized. Law records show punishments as well. Adultery could bring public humiliation, whippings, or fines. In some towns, convicted adulterers were paraded through the streets, wearing ridiculous costumes or riding backward on a donkey. Cases of sodomy, often broadly defined to include any unnatural act, could result in burning at the stake. Court registers in Italy and France preserve chilling lists of men executed for crimes against nature. Whether guilty or not, the record speaks to a society where sexual behavior could literally be a matter of life and death. Even folklore left written traces. Monks kept chronicles that mix fact with scandal. One Benedictine account records that a local priest was discovered with a concubine in the rectory, and both were punished publicly. Another describes a knight excommunicated for bedding his stepmother, a sin that horrified his peers. Though written with moral outrage, these chronicles cannot hide the sheer variety of acts medieval people engaged in. Then there is art. Marginalia, in illuminated manuscripts, sometimes feature grotesque, playful images of monks chasing women, of men exposing themselves, of animals in sexual poses. Scholars debate whether these were satirical jokes or moral warnings, but their existence proves that sex was never far from the medieval imagination. Even in the most sacred of books, even the dead speak. Archaeologists have uncovered amulets shaped like phalluses, buried with men and women alike. In one German grave, a pouch of herbs believed to stimulate desire was found beneath the remains of a woman. In another, a skeleton was buried with a carved figurine that may have been used as a charm for fertility. These finds bridge rumor and reality, showing that the body and its desires were honored or feared well beyond life itself. All of this evidence paints a picture of a society that documented sex not for pleasure, but for control. The church wanted order, physicians wanted theories, courts wanted justice. Yet in the process, they left behind proof of practices both ordinary and bizarre. Proof that desire, however forbidden, could never truly be erased. And yet, these records also raise questions. If priests wrote manuals condemning acts in such detail, were they simply describing sins or betraying temptations of their own? If courts annulled marriages for lack of consummation, how many secret humiliations were never written down? If doctors prescribed treatments to inflame desire, did their patients actually use them, or were these cures part of a marketplace of fantasy? The line between prescription and practice blurs, which leads us deeper to the mysteries that cannot be fully explained. Because some of the strangest medieval practices survive not in records or rumors, but in stories so strange, so unsettling, that even scholars hesitate to call them true. For all the records and rules, there remain stories that slip through the cracks, phenomena so strange they resist easy explanation. They are the shadows of the medieval bedroom, where desire and dread blurred into legend, where bodies became battlegrounds of fear, faith, and superstition. One of the most persistent tales is that of the night visitors. Medieval people believed that demons in human form, incubi and succubi, crept into homes while the world slept. The incubus was said to press down upon women, forcing itself upon them, while the succubus drained the life of men through unnatural congress. Victims described waking in terror, unable to move, their breath choked, their bodies paralyzed. Today, we might call this sleep paralysis. But in the candlelit chambers of the Middle Ages, it was proof of diabolic assault. Some even claimed these demons left behind monstrous offspring, part human, part fiend, cursed to wander the earth. Another mystery lurks in the records of magical theft. Men swore in court that witches had stolen their virility. They spoke of their members vanishing, shriveled away by sorcery. In one infamous trial, villagers testified that a coven had collected stolen genitals in a nest, feeding them like baby birds. Absurd as it sounds, these testimonies were treated with deadly seriousness. Whether the men suffered from impotence, disease, or shame, their fear was given the shape of magic, and lives were destroyed on the basis of belief. Equally strange are the accounts of love magic gone wrong. Charms meant to stir passion could, according to legend, backfire. A woman who slipped herbs into her lover's wine might find him obsessed to the point of madness, unable to sleep, wasting away. A man who carried an amulet of dried toad skin might believe himself irresistible until his body broke out in sores. Were these curses real, or were they the effects of contaminated herbs, untreated disease, or simple coincidence? The line between natural and supernatural was so thin that even scholars of the time admitted uncertainty. Then there are the tales of spectral pregnancies. Some chronicles speak of women who swore they had been impregnated by invisible beings, delivering children who died at birth or bore strange deformities. To us, these may sound like tragic attempts to explain rape, infidelity, or congenital defects, but to medieval minds, they were signs that the devil himself could corrupt the womb. Even the natural world seemed complicit. Medieval bestiaries, illustrated encyclopedias of animals claimed that certain creatures held erotic powers. The mandrake root, shaped like a human body, was said to scream when pulled from the ground, its cry lethal to the hearer, yet it was treasured as an aphrodisiac and fertility charm. The barnacle goose was believed to grow from driftwood, and so eating it was permitted even during fasts, a loophole some took advantage of to feast without guilt. The unicorn, though mythical, was imagined as a beast, tamed only by the touch of a virgin, an image heavy with sexual symbolism. Did people believe these tales literally? Perhaps not always. But they show how deeply sexuality was woven into every corner of medieval thought, from gardens to forests to the edges of imagination. Perhaps the strangest phenomenon of all lies in the public rituals of shame. In parts of Europe, couples accused of infertility could be forced into bizarre trials. Some records describe men being led through the streets in mock processions, their failures sung by jeering neighbors. Others mention wives stripped to the waist, forced to swear innocence before church altars. These rituals combined humiliation, superstition, and spectacle punishments that revealed as much about community fears as about private acts. The question remains, how much of this was real? Did people truly wake beneath the weight of demons? Or were they crushed by their own guilt and fear? Did witches actually steal manhood? Or was it the cruel invention of courts desperate for scapegoats? Did mandrakes inflame desire? Or was it simply belief that gave them power? We cannot know for certain. What we do know is this. In the Middle Ages, the body was never just the body. It was a canvas on which faith, fear, and folklore painted their darkest images. Every unexplained illness, every miscarriage, every faltering erection, every forbidden desire, each was interpreted through a lens of demons, magic, and divine punishment. And so the bedroom became a place not only of intimacy, but of terror. A place where the walls themselves seemed to whisper, where shadows hinted at demons, where every touch might carry the weight of sin or the promise of damnation. But these fears did not die with the Middle Ages. They echoed forward, shaping how later generations remembered the past. Which leads us to another question. What legacy did these bizarre beliefs leave behind? And how do they still haunt us today? The Middle Ages may be gone, but their shadows linger. The bizarre practices of that era echo in ways we rarely notice, shaping our imagination of sex, sin, and secrecy even today. Take the chastity belt. Historians now insist it was mostly a Renaissance fantasy, yet the image survives in films, cartoons, and novels. It has become a symbol of male control, of female imprisonment, of the idea that desire itself must be locked away. Whether real or not, the myth has more power than the artifact. Or consider the incubus and succubus. We now speak of sleep paralysis, of night terrors, of the science of the brain. But the language we use, the feeling of being pressed down, the sense of an intruder in the room, still carries echoes of medieval fears. Horror films and folklore blogs retell these stories, giving them new life in an age that prides itself on rationality. Even the obsession with fertility lingers. The medieval belief that sex was tied to health and balance may sound laughable, but modern industries thrive on similar promises. Pills, supplements, and potions claim to restore vigor, inflame passion, or extend virility. What were once charms whispered over herbs are now capsules sold in sleek bottles, marketed with the same urgency. Without desire, you are incomplete. Our fascination with scandal is equally medieval. Just as chroniclers once whispered of kings and queens with grotesque appetites, today, tabloids and gossip sites thrive on exposing the private lives of celebrities and rulers. The names and costumes have changed, but the hunger to know what happens in the bedchamber of the powerful has not. And perhaps the greatest legacy is the silence. For centuries, sex was wrapped in shame, treated as something to be controlled, hidden, or punished. That silence still shapes us. Schools hesitate to teach it. Families avoid speaking of it. Religions continue to wrestle with it. The Middle Ages may be over, but the tension between desire and morality, between body and soul, still grips us. This is why the medieval world continues to fascinate. It was an age of contradictions, but those contradictions are not alien to us. They are our own, only written in harsher ink, on dirtier parchment, under the watchful eyes of priests and kings. When we laugh at their bizarre beliefs, we also recognize them. When we shudder at their punishments, we glimpse the echoes of judgment that survive in our own societies. And when we marvel at their strange remedies, we see the timeless human hope that love, lust, and longing can be controlled by ritual, by law, by potion, or by prayer. But there is one last question that lingers, sharper than the rest. If the Middle Ages were filled with secrets, rumors, and practices, so strange they defy belief, what does that say about us, who still carry their shadows? The Middle Ages glitter in memory as an age of knights and cathedrals, of soaring towers and sacred relics. But beneath that beauty lay a world both raw and unsettling, a world where love was chained by law, where desire was branded as sin, and where the body itself became a battlefield of fear and faith. We have walked through streets rank with smoke and sweat, peered into the cramped rooms where families lived without privacy, listened to sermons that condemned lust while dwelling on its details. We have heard of chastity belts, of witches stealing manhood, of demons pressing down in the night, and we have seen how echoes of these beliefs still shape our imaginations centuries later. Yet, even after all this, the truth remains elusive. Did couples truly submit to public bedding ceremonies? Were phantoms of lust real? Or were they shadows of disease and fear? Were the potions and charms acts of magic, or simply desperate hope dressed in ritual? The lines blur, leaving us caught between fact and legend, record and rumor. And perhaps that is the most haunting lesson of all. The medieval world shows us that sex is never just about the act itself. It is about power, control, survival, and shame. It is about the stories we tell to explain desire, the punishments we invent to contain it, and the myths we whisper when explanations fail. We may smile at their strangeness, but we are not so different. We too carry superstitions, fears, and silences. We too live with contradictions between what we desire and what we are told to deny, between the public mask and the private act. The Middle Ages were bizarre, yes, but they hold up a mirror to us, showing that human longing has always been messy, grotesque, and impossible to cage. So, I leave you with a question. If people centuries ago invented demons, potions, and punishments to explain their most intimate fears, what are the stories we tell ourselves today? And how will future generations look back on our own rituals of love, shame, and desire? Tell me what you think. Do the bizarre practices of the Middle Ages shock you? Or Do they simply reveal what has always been hidden beneath human skin? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to keep walking with me into the shadows of history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you never miss the secrets we uncover together. Because the past is never truly past. Its whispers still echo. And sometimes, those whispers are far closer than we care to admit.